questions?
When can we do it?
So how does this differ from the old social credit model?
With social credit, they were talking about going beyond infrastructure. They were talking about it funding all manner of things. We're very cautious. We want to stay focused on, like the clip says, we need to be sure of where we're spending that money. And if there's capacity in the infrastructure area, then that will not be inflationary. With social credit, they were opening up the conversation to all sorts of spending.
We're more on the capital side. Social credit was dealing with day-to-day expenses as well, which can be more inflationary.
Has it been done anywhere else in the world?
We did it in the 30s. The first Labor government used money from the Reserve Bank to build tens of thousands of state houses. In fact, right up until the 1980s, the Reserve Bank provided the Dairy Board with a line of credit. Martin, how much money was spent over time?
In today's dollars, it would be about $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion with a B, which essentially built an export dairy industry, became a significant part of Fonterra. And that was monetary finance from the Reserve Bank starting in the 30s, as it was with other producer boards, for example, that got their kickstart back in those days.
And the Chinese are using it to great effect. We're not playing on a level playing field.
Well, I would just say that a lot of the magic of the Chinese economy, the Chinese miracle, a lot of it is about banking. And they initially started, I think, with one bank. And they had many, many thousands of banks, and that's what opened up their economy.
They use public finance. A vast amount of it is distributed through what they call policy banks, which are like public banks. So essentially, they're a bank that's given a charter to go and build an industry or to build physical infrastructure. Those public banks are using public money to generate lending into commercial ventures, right? You're not directly putting public money into the commercial ventures. You've got a bank. That bank is issuing loans that support the charter. So I think that approach, which we've used, which Japan used, which South Korea used, which China learned from those countries, is what's been a large part of their success.
Cliff, you had a manufacturing plant in China for a while, is that right?
We've got a branch in China. My business is a manufacturing plant in Auckland, and we've got a branch in China. It was interesting when we set that branch up. It gives you an idea of how the money's guided. When we went to start our branch, we wanted to go borrow some money to set up just an overdraft so we could start trading. And they said, no, sorry, we don't like the kind of business you do. If you're this type of, if you're a semiconductor business, you could get money, or if you're this type of business. So it was about infrastructure development.
What legislative changes would be needed if we were to do something like that?
Well, there's nothing that stops us from doing it right now.
Okay. So you would need to change the
Are you
Reserve
sure
Bank?
there's nothing in the public finance act, or, I know I was going to ask a similar question, but also about like any of our international trade deals that might cause us to be sued by other investors from overseas who would say they don't have the opportunity to invest in that infrastructure at a profit if the government does. I'm not sure if that's...
Well, I'm not aware of the international obligations we have. I'm just aware of the legislative process.
I think you guys had an interesting point. Would foreign direct investment see this as competition?
I mean, China's been doing that for years. Maybe we're small enough to bully. Morgan, do you have any comment?
Well, it would depend on whether it was a subsidy or not, whether it was perceived to be as such, because then the WTO would go, or some under the appellate body would go, hold on a second, you know, it appears to be a subsidy. With regard to the Public Finance Act, public finance or public expenditure in this way stopped being legislated under the Public Finance Act 1989. The constraints upon public finance are ideological, right, rather than actually anything kind of
legal.
Procedural. Exactly.
There's no legislative barriers.
No.
But presumably within the Reserve Bank and Treasury, there'd be a lot of pushback and people arguing
yes.
that the sky
That
would
is where
fall
the
if
ideology
we did
comes
it.
in.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
And they would run a campaign maybe to discredit anyone advocating for this.
Well, at hope they wouldn't
You'd
do
be
that.
surprised. Seriously.
What's that?
You'd be surprised.
Over the
Yeah.
number of camps.
Yeah, well, I mean, turn the cameras on. We're not having conversations with those people. They understand that the state is self-financing.
Yeah.
Because here we're talking about settlement cash, we're talking rather than commercial bank deposits, which is where the legislation, funnily enough, kind of sits. It sits with the Crown Bank account, which is Westpac government branch, which isn't actually government spending or where it's sourced from, which is the Crown settlement account. So they kind of understand at least certain parts of the Reserve Bank and Treasury, begrudgingly so, I might add, understand that the state is self-financing. These are very, albeit very important parts of Reserve Bank and Treasury. They're kind of, shushed, or, those kind of thoughts are very much dissuaded. So much so, actually, that when you talk to people that actually that have worked in public finance and Treasury, when you ask them, what's the Crown settlement account, they've got no idea. But yet that's the source of the public core crown expenditure.
Just a couple of quick observations. There will always be risk with the international trade agreements because basically we pass some sovereignty over to the World Trade Organization in signing them. And yeah, there might be challenges, but hopefully not too bad. Secondly, it is a question of sovereignty. It's a question of New Zealand having control over its money. We gave it away to commercial banks, which are now being owned by Australia. And in this case, in a very nice, narrow, strong case, we would be taking that sovereignty back and just saying we will issue the money that is necessary to build this infrastructure. That money will disappear into the system. We won't even notice it unless we spend more than like 200 billion a year. But there's nothing stopping the government simply issuing the money it needs to build infrastructure.
Okay, so Bruce, just explain a bit of your background. You work for the Reserve Bank?
I had a long career with the Auditor General and with the Reserve Bank. Governments can spend money into existence. The only problem is how that money is used. And if it's used where there's capacity in the economy, as you guys so clearly say, it creates wealth. It creates wealth for the private sector. It creates wealth into the country.
And to riff off Bruce here, recall that an Appropriation Act, or an Increase in Supply Act, for the nerds, that is a legislative instrument to create money. Essentially, it legislates the expenditure of government money. That's its whole point. That's the point, arguably, some would say, some politics scholars would say that's the point of Parliament, not government.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's the institutional settings, and in fact our petition is geared up to exactly this point, that the money issuing power of government is there, it's indisputable. People like Morgan have spent a long time actually in the weeds proving that's where it comes from. But to use it for purposes like infrastructure, we need to get those institutional settings right. And is it Parliament, is it the Executive, is it some other, is it a Minister of Finance or whatever, who makes the decisions about the quantum and where it goes? That's the political decision that you guys have got to make, knowing that the capability is there.
We're suggesting that initially it's used in parallel with existing funding sources. We're saying start small and grow bigger, and we're asking for an inquiry. We're not saying scrap the bond market, we're not going to borrow, but we're going to start building up our sovereignty, we're going to start building up our muscle around spending and creating the money ourselves via the Reserve Bank.
If you were given the opportunity to have a pilot of this, what infrastructure would be targeted and what kind of numbers would you start with?
Something small.
What would you pick first? How about some new pipes so we don't have sewage flowing into the sea?
So what about electrifying the rest of the rail network?
That's the beauty of it. You can use it for anything, and it's a political decision. It's simply a tool.
That's right, so long as there's capacity in the area you're spending it.
The Infrastructure Commission has produced a prioritised list of significant projects. So our suggestion is we start with that. Parliament signs off on the big picture, the quantum, the qualifying projects based on something like that independent advice. Maybe that's 20 million, maybe that's spent over a 10-year period, so the Reserve Bank is able to know and plan for that amount of publicly generated money. It's a totally transparent process.
Yeah, and I guess if we're buying stuff from overseas, then the inflationary impact would be low. It's, I guess, if you're spending lots of money on labor and you're bidding up the cost of labor here in civil engineering, that might be an issue, in horizontal or vertical.
You're talking about bidding up the cost of labor and whatnot. That's why we make the point it's important to direct it where there is capacity. And if you set out a long-term infrastructure pipeline, like the Infrastructure Commission's doing, it can be planned, and though that capacity can be built over time.
Yeah.
And we can get
Funding
productive.
certainty.
Yeah.
Funding certainty, yeah, that's it.
Regional planning, right? Because inflation can break out in a region, right? So again, that can be part of the process to have, and that's a tool that can be used to stamp down inflation in a region, without having to whack everyone's mortgages across the whole country.
And resources properly spaced too, rather than a project coming to an end and then they all shoot through because we've no more work to do.
Yeah.
They go to Australia or somewhere. Well, that's just crazy. Why not keep them here, have the resource planning going right through?
Yeah.
So what would be the anticipated impact on the currency, because you're essentially debasing it?
You're debasing it if you create too much money, and particularly for the wrong things, right? If, for example, you're creating money and that money is going into infrastructure, human capital and physical infrastructure, I would have thought like a ratings agency would be saying, hallelujah, New Zealand is going to improve its productivity and it's going to be a much stronger country as a result of that. If the money was going somewhere profligate, that's a different thing. So your currency will be as strong as your economy. There's other factors that come into it, but over the long run, that's where it should sit. That's part of the balancing act, and that's part of giving the Reserve Bank and the Treasury multiple tools, tax bonds, different types of bonds, infrastructure bonds maybe aimed at the local KiwiSaver funds or whatever.
It's also a great way to boost GDP. I mean, it goes directly into infrastructure. The economy is then seen to be a healthy economy that's growing. One of the great ways to grow the economy is to grow the infrastructure. So then that means that our transport is more efficient. Electricity prices are cheaper. And so there's a big flow-on effect there.
Yeah, private enterprise can base it.
Yeah, that's right. It provides the springboard for private enterprise to flourish.
Yeah.